Hello, everyone. This week's assignment is going to be to create a design that can be put on merchandise to benefit a nonprofit. So think about what you are passionate about, what you care about, and seek out the appropriate nonprofit to create your design for. And that could be anything from a cat shelter to a museum. Designers can really do a lot of good by donating their time. People at nonprofits, especially small nonprofits, are all consumed with what they are doing. If you are a person working at a cat shelter, your main focus is going to be taking care of cats. If you are a scientist at a paleontological institute, you're going to be all consumed locating and studying and publishing about dinosaur bones. And often, when small nonprofits cannot afford design work, they are forced to do that themselves, and those designs can come out as clumsy and misguided because those people simply aren't experts in design. They're focused on other things. So this example is a design that I made years ago for the Carthage Institute of Paleontology, and we printed them on T-shirts, and we sell a different version each year, and then the proceeds go toward funding the scientific work that's being done at the museum. So what I want you to do is, once you've decided on your nonprofit, you'll need to go find some source material or create source material related to that subject. So I found a old drawing by Othniel Charles Marsh of a Triceratops, and then I'm using that to create my sort of funky skull and crossbones for paleontology logo. You'll want to make sure that the work that you're referencing is either in the public domain or you're altering it enough in such a way that it's been changed significantly so you're not violating copyright. Charles Marsh was a paleontologist in the 1800s, so his drawing is well in the public domain. And then I've got a few other odds and ends here that I'm going to reference. Shovels, map of Wisconsin and Montana, because the Institute's in Wisconsin and our dig site's in Montana. So I'm going to use those to trace out the states for my logo. So once you have your imagery, you may want to edit it in Photoshop before you bring it into Illustrator, where we're going to make the final logo. Photoshop is really good for photographic post-production. And one of the main things that helps out in this assignment is if you go into Photoshop and you bring down the opacity a little bit of that image. And that way it won't compete with your final design. The two will separate visually. You'll be able to toggle your images on and off as you go as well. This image is pretty blown out already, so I'm just going to use it as is. So to begin, we'll open up Adobe Illustrator and we'll go File, New. You'll start out on the Art and Illustration tab, and you'll want to change the points to inches. I like to work in a 1-to-1 scale, and because this is a design for a t-shirt, I'm going to make a 15-inch square. We're only making one design, so you only need one artboard. In advanced options, I'm just going to keep the color mode as RGB color, because I'm only making a design that has one color. And the reason I do that for CIP is to keep the cost down for when we print the t-shirts, or if we elect to screen print them ourselves. It just makes things easy. CMYK is for printing. So if you are going to make a color image, and that's okay if you wanted to include a few colors, you'd probably want it to be CMYK so that you can see what it's going to look like when it gets printed out. We'll change the raster effect to high, and then preview mode we can leave at default. And then hit create. Now you'll want to have your layer panel open over here. And if it's not open already, you'll go to Window, Layers to turn that on. Next, we want to place our file that we're going to be referencing by going to File, Place. Grab my Triceratops, click once, and it'll land on the artboard. Now I've got this blue bounding box, so I can now resize the image if I want to. And what you'll notice is that when you try to do that, it becomes distorted. Command Z will undo whatever your last action is. If you hold Shift, you can resize the image, and it won't become distorted. So once you've got it, and you can rotate as well. And once you've got it where you want it, we're going to embed that file. So if the control panel isn't open, you'll go to Window and click Control. Embed is right here. When the X disappears, that means the image is embedded. Now, what embedding does is it takes the external image, the file, and it merges it into the Illustrator file that you are working on. Why is that important? Because if you were to separate the files from that one folder, let's say you deleted or moved the Triceratops image, when you went into the Illustrator file and tried to look at it, it wouldn't be there. So that's why you have to embed it. Now you can still manipulate it and move it around, but we want it to also be locked in place because we don't want it to move once we start working on our final image. So I'm going to go over here onto the layers and click the lock. And now it's not able to move. At the bottom of the layers panel, you can see there is a create new layers option, and we want to do that. So I would continue moving forward with this, making a digital collage, adding each of my individual elements, and then embedding each one. So that would be the shovel or the pick, etc. Using the zoom tool, I can zoom in on my image, or I can use Command minus and Command plus. I'm going to select the pen tool because that's how we're going to make all these interesting linear elements in the design. I want these to be individual lines. So you're going to have the stroke set to black, and the fill, you should have the red cross through it, which means no fill. Then I'm going to go in and I'm going to just systematically trace the various curvatures that I think are important. Okay, so we'll do this side bone here. When you get to the point where you'd like to stop and you want the pen tool to be freed from the line, you can just hit the letter A. This tool that I'm on now, the direct selection tool, allows me to go in and manipulate each individual point on the line. If I click the, that is the direct selection tool, if I click the selection tool, I get the entire line. And you'll notice up here in the control area that you can change the stroke. So I want that line to be thicker. I can change that to 3 points, 4 points. And we'll toggle off the Triceratops image so that we can see that. I can also change the line type. For the Triceratops image, I've used the width profile 1, and that tapers off the lines as they get to their edges. And I just find that to be a much more elegant and pleasing element of the design. Now, if I wanted to do a fill, so let's say I want this to be black, because in my final design I have areas that are blackened in. I'm going to trace a shape. So the two endpoints need to eventually meet. And And once they do, I'll go to the fill and I'll change it to black. And now my shape is filled in. Your design should contain text of some kind. And if you just are going to have regular horizontal text, that's fine. You just use the text type tool here. But it might be more interesting to do something that is on a path. So for this design, I've used a circle, and the circle tool is found here, ellipse tool, and I would hold shift to keep it uniform. I'm going to create an invisible path. So to do that, I have no stroke or fill. It's the same way of creating a line. We'll do this on a new layer, actually. And I recommend that you do that. Have separate layers for each of these individual visual elements. Like I've got a separate layer for the skull, I've got a separate layer for the text, I've got a separate layer for the states, and a separate layer for the shovel and the pick. So I'm going to pull it in an arc beneath my Triceratops here. Again, push A to get that to free itself. And then I'm going to hold down the text type tool and click type on a path. We got teeny tiny letters. Okay. And now I can type whatever I want onto that path. Now, it's not imperative that you have each of the elements in position when you go to work on them. So you'll inevitably need to be resizing various elements. So let's take a look at Montana here. If I want to, I could draw this elsewhere, and I did. I drew it up here. And it used to be that big initially, and then I realized how big it would need to be to fit nicely into the design, so I had it resized and then placed it down there. And you want to create a design that's pleasing and not at all crowded. So one of the things you'll notice about the final design is that each of the visual elements is both separate and part of the whole. And they all obey what I like to call the puzzle piece rule, which is that they are reasonably far away from each other. They have a little bit of space to breathe. Each element sort of respects every other element. And if there is a position where an element interjects another, it does so in a logical way. Like if you had seen the head of the axe here, like going into the Triceratops' mouth, that would look really, really strange. And then there's also not great big empty areas where there's nothing happening visually. You should preserve your original Illustrator file for your archives. It's also helpful because you might want to go back in and change something. Me, for example, when I do my next exhibition, which will be 2021, I'm going to want to change the t-shirt logo, right? So you want to preserve that original file so that you can go in there and make alterations. In terms of turning this in for the assignment, you will go to export, export as, and you can turn this in as a JPEG. And I'd like you to rename your file, and it'll be your last name, underscore, first name, underscore, NP for nonprofit, and logo. Export, hit OK. So your design should be finished for our next group meeting. Reach out to me if you have any questions, or if you have other techniques that you would like me to go over in Illustrator, and I will make a new video. Otherwise, I will see you all next class.